Welcome everyone to today's Trek Friday Transportation Seminar, which is also the Portland Bureau of Transportation Lunch and Learn. I'm Timo Forsberg with the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and I've had the honor of working with Trek and combining our two presentations. The PBOT Lunch and Learn has been going on for maybe 10 years and Trek many years before that, but I'm happy that we can have a joint presentation today on a great topic, talking about how our hardworking staff at PBOT gets stuff done, even when it seems like it's going to be tricky to do so. If you're following along at home or online, you'll be able to get the slides from the archive or watch the presentation later in full. So if you missed anything, don't worry about that. And please make sure to post any questions if you're watching online. We will get to those when our presenter is finished. So without much ado, I want to introduce today's presenter, Andrew Aebi. He'll be talking on making the seemingly impossible project real through local improvement districts. And Andrew has a long history of working in the Portland area on getting projects done. He actually started with our transit provider, TriMet, in the early 80s, had a hand in getting the original Max light rail put together. That's before it was the blue line. There was no need for color back then. There was one line. Spent several years there, went on to take a tour with Intel and see how the private world does their things, and then has been with PBOT for almost 18 years now, working in dual capacity as a capital projects manager and also as the city's local improvement district administrator. Thank you. So join me in welcoming Andrew for today's presentation.
Thank you, Timo. Thank you all very much for coming here today. It's a real pleasure here to be with you. I've got about a 30+ slide presentation. Most of the slides, I'm just going to spend a few seconds on them. One slide, I think it's number 9, I have about a 4-minute video kind of in the middle that I want to show to you. And we'll go ahead and get started. And this is the part where you...
There we go, give it another solid click.
There we go.
Cool.
So just wanted to set kind of the historical context for you. Local improvement districts are not unique to Portland. They are used around the country. As a matter of fact, they've been used for the better part of 1,000 years. And how many of you actually know what a local improvement district is? So I see a good number of hands that are not up. So what a local improvement district is it's basically a temporary entity created by the jurisdiction, in this case, City of Portland. It's different than, for example, like a school district, which exists in perpetuity. It's something that in Portland, the Portland City Council creates to fund local infrastructure, and the benefiting properties in a particular area pay for the cost of the local improvement that's being constructed. So local improvement districts have been used since the City of Portland was founded in 1851. One time there were raging debates about whether we should pave what was then known as B Street, which we now know as West Burnside Street. That was a gravel street. And West Burnside Street was actually improved through a local improvement district. So remember that the next time when you're headed around town. So just to kind of set the stage for this, we don't use local improvement districts everywhere. So today there's a lot of transportation needs. Where local improvement districts make the most sense is when the streets have not been built to current standards. So today we have about 306 miles of streets in the city of Portland that are paved without curbs, about 15% of the city's inventory. And we also have about 56 miles, 55.7 miles to be exact, of unpaved streets, which is just under 3% of the city's inventory. So these are the streets that you will never see in a Travel Portland brochure. They're the ones that we're working to bring up to speed. But about 82% of the streets in the city of Portland are paved with curbs. Many of them have sidewalks. Those are areas where people want traffic calming or something different. We would not usually use a local improvement district to do those. Right now, we currently have 14 formed local improvement districts citywide. and they complement other funding sources. So we currently have $56 million worth of local improvement districts in the city of Portland. So for every dollar that we bring in, for every dollar that we put in non-LID funding, we bring in $4.68 of LID funding to make these projects go. Just to put that into perspective, right now we have a Fix Our Streets heavy vehicle use tax program, which has been very successful. That's about $64 million. So this is on a par with that level. And we also have an $83 million system development charge program, which is also building infrastructure. So I mentioned that LIDs have been around since the city's founding. I think another thing that's been around since the city's founding is the debate about how to improve streets cost effectively. So you can see that a little over 100 years ago, there was a lot of debate on how much money should we spend building a street. I think one of the reasons why we're busy with our Fix Our Streets program is we're dealing with a lot of streets that either weren't built properly in the first place or we haven't quite had the resources to keep them maintained over the years. So one of the things we really try to do with LIDs is spend a little bit more money and build something that functionally will last and not be a maintenance obligation over time. So the first LID that I wanted to cover with you is the Southeast 80th Avenue and Mill Street LID in Southeast Portland. You can see the overview map there. I know a lot of you are from out of town. You may not be familiar. Portland has, I believe, the only volcano in the city limits anywhere in the United States, and this project is located just to the east of that hilly area where there's a reservoir. And by the way, this picture that I'm showing you here on this slide, this is not something that I put together. This is something that a property owner emailed to me and said, is there something you can do to help me? So this is a street that's on the way to an elementary school. And you can see it looks more like a canal in Venice than it does a street. So, and this is another picture. You can see there's a traffic signal down there at the end of the intersection. So children walk down the street or try to walk down the street from the bus stop at the traffic signal to get to the elementary school. You can see that when it rains, it's a really difficult journey for the many months of the year out of the year when it rains in the city of Portland. And this is the north-south street that is adjacent to that street, and you can see the potholes. And that's the only north-south route there for 6 blocks in either direction for children to walk to school. So just really not a very inviting environment at all. So what was really neat about this project, and keep in mind that the property owners have been calling me for the better part of 13 years. So I want you to understand that LIDs don't necessarily happen overnight. It doesn't like you pick up the phone and I'll be out there in a month or so putting together an LID. But what happened was, if you look at the slide, you can see that red line on both of those photos. That is where the existing sanitary sewer line is in Mill Street. So the Bureau of Environmental Services in Portland was planning to do a major sanitary sewer replacement. And so when I found out about the sanitary sewer replacement, I said, what if we could take the money that the Bureau of Environmental Services was going to use? They were going to excavate everything out, and then they were going to put a trench patch over the top of it. What if we could take that money and then get some FTC funding and then get some LID funding from the property owners and just put all that money together, and then that BES money could then go to reconstructing the road and adding drainage instead. So if you look at this on the left, you can see the original plan was we had that really bad pavement in yellow, and then we had a gravel shoulder there shown in red. What we'd rather do is build a proper street a little bit wider so the school buses can get through, as shown in black on that slide on the right. And then we'd like to build new sidewalks, as shown in green. We're still going to have the sewer in the same location. So I just wanted to show you here kind of the real life perspective of what it looks like on that street. And Michael, I might just need your help here. I just need to click on that link.
Yeah.
There we go. And you turn the sound on. Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I walk here to school every single day with my brother. And from my house, the street that I'm walking, there's really no sidewalk. And there's a lot of cars, parked cars, and we always have to walk in the middle of the road. And my mom's always nervous when we walk to school because some cars, they don't pay attention. We come 2 blocks to school. Half of our walk is unimproved road with 1 foot mud puddles. The other half of our walk is a block with no sidewalks and cars parked along the side of the road, which force us to walk down the middle of the road.
My mom drops me off at Gwen's house, and me and Gwen walk together. My favorite way of getting to school is walking in the back.
Cerca de nuestra escuela aquí en Bridger, no hace mucho tiempo venía, yo traigo a mis niños a la escuela. Estoy parqueada en la calle Mill, y es una calle que está totalmente en malas condiciones, con pozos, hoyos con agua, lodo, y es muy difícil cuando vienen los papás con sus niños. Me parqué en la orilla de esa calle para traer a mis niños. Vine por ellos. Íbamos ya a la casa y estaba poniendo el asiento, estaba poniendo su cinturón de seguridad. Cuando pasa un carro y yo estaba de espaldas, totalmente me baña de agua con lodo y sucia desde mi cabeza, ¿verdad? Quedé toda mojada y no podía creer que estuviera pasando eso, pero pasó. Entonces, esto me mojó esta vez. Gracias a Dios no fue algo trágico, pero así como pasó eso, puede pasar un accidente.
Well, there's a bunch of water puddles, mud puddles, and there's no sidewalks, so it's like really hard to get to school.
How do you get to school?
With my scooter.
Yeah, tell me about your scooter.
Well, I like to scooter with it, but I never really did it for a long time because it was pre-vacation.
We always walk to school because we live really close. But we're on an unimproved road, so it doesn't feel too safe. Sometimes the cars slide around. We feel a little nervous about that.
Well, it's pretty dirty. It's pretty dirty. And like at night after practice, after remember basketball practice, it's really pitch dark. You can't see nothing. And with the roads, the puddles and stuff, you might get stuck in there, and cars might not see. So you might use a cross the way in a car pitch.
So we live on Aebi and Division, we're between Division and Clinton, so we don't have a safe, easy spot to cross to walk to school. We have to drive, we go down to 76 and take 76. If we had a place that was easy to cross home, we would walk more.
Well, I ride the bus. When the bus is up, he tries to get out.
Yeah.
It's a motor car that's going very fast, so it takes a long time for the bus to get in the lane.
Yeah.
And then we get about the same block, and the car is going really fast. It's really compact, so it takes a long time for the bus to get in. So most of the time we're kind of a little bit late. And the only good thing is the bus gets to our stop earlier, so it's really not late.
All right. Thank you. You want to just put me back into the PowerPoint there? All right, so the next local improvement district I was going to share with you is Northeast Alberta Street in the Cully neighborhood of Northeast Portland, and it provides access to a park and a Head Start school. This local improvement district is actually completed, and this is what we call a neighborhood greenway. This is where the neighborhood greenway route goes in Northeast Portland. You can see what it looked like there on the left. Worked with the property owner on the north side of the street who wanted to develop that. There was a Comcast site that came in there, and then they were required of the condition of development to improve the street, which we did through a local improvement district. This is the only east-west street for a long distance in either direction, so it significantly improved the pedestrian and bicycle access through the neighborhood. And then an LID that we're getting ready to go to construction in a few months is Northeast 47th Avenue. It's in an industrial area, and it's on the way to the Portland Airport. Really a good, interesting story how this came about, but Portland Parks and Recreation is putting in, or I should say has put in, a new park here called Whitaker Ponds, and they had a requirement by the Bureau of Transportation to put in some sidewalk. So what would have happened is, in the absence of a LID, they would have spent a lot of money to build an island of sidewalk that wouldn't connect to anything. So they would have had sidewalk along here, and it would not have connected to the bus stop down here where the bus stops, nor would it have connected up here to the north. So when Parks approached me, I said, well, maybe we can get some SDC funding. Maybe we can do a local improvement district with the property owners. And then we were able to take that money that the Parks Bureau would have put into building not very useful sidewalk into something far more comprehensive. So we're now going to improve the entirety of this street. And we really reached out to our friends in the freight community on this. This particular project is on a heavily used street. You can see that the pavement is really in atrocious shape. And so we thought, let's just get everything done. In terms of adding stormwater, there's currently not a storm sewer. There's no sidewalks. There's a 100-year-old cast iron water main. Those of you who live in Portland may know that we had a big water main break a month or two ago with water kind of gushing in all the streets. We have over 100-year-old cast iron water main. So we said, we're going to do the environmental permitting and tear up the street. Let's just go ahead and replace the water main, extend sanitary sewer, take care of everything in a single project. So this is the design that we've come up with. So one of the things we try to do on local improvement districts is identify the cost drivers of an LID. So in this particular instance, we were working in a constrained right-of-way. And so we went into it saying, we're going to do this project, but we're all going to play in the sandbox together, and we're not going to blow the street out and make it wider where we have to buy up all the businesses along the side of the street and put them out of business. We're going to make everything fit in the existing right-of-way. So we came up with a very innovative multi-use path design so that we could accommodate that without having to buy any significant amounts of right-of-way. So I showed you that picture of how bad the pavement looked. Again, we really reached out to the freight committee because they have a lot of trucks going up and down the street. They were very supportive of it. They said those people who drive trucks for a living, they don't want to get into a conflict with a bicyclist because that would be with them for the rest of their life. So they're very supportive of the safety improvements. And then they really like the idea of improving the pavement. So we're going to take that asphalt street that's falling apart. You can actually pick up chunks of the asphalt and take it home with you. We're going to dig all that out and we're going to replace it with a concrete street. This is an example of a concrete street that was built in 1992. And when we went out and had our inspectors look at it, the street was in perfect shape. So that's what we're trying to do, is build assets that require much less maintenance over time. Where equity factors into this is when we were putting this project together and justifying the amount of subsidy we were providing to buy down the cost of the LID, we were looking at the populations that we were serving in the Cully neighborhood. And you can see we have a far higher proportion of single mothers, African Americans, Latinos, low-income families, young families, and large families. So that was a key factor in us deciding to allocate as much funding as we did, over $4 million in SDC funding, so that the LID amount could be correspondingly reduced. So this is an example of what the street looks like. So those pictures, the left picture and the middle picture, show what that street looked like in 2010. This is kind of a famous picture to PBOT because it showed kids trying to get home from the park, and they had to like hug the fog line with a oncoming truck. The picture on the far right is a street project we did not far away in 2013, where we similarly took a busy street and built sidewalks. And before the sidewalks had even finished curing, one of the babies that lived on the street was actually crawling up and down the new sidewalk. So we really do want to make the street safe for everybody. So what happened was when we got that 47th Avenue Local Improvement District put together, we kind of had the domino effect where we had all these other really poor condition, poor infrastructure streets in the area. So I was approached by my former employer, TriMet, about we're expanding the region's bus service, and they needed to build a new bus garage. So this local improvement district is a block away from the other one that's going to construction this summer. And this is what the street looks like today. So this is one of the 55 miles of unpaved streets, 56.5 miles of unpaved streets in the city of Portland. You can see us in really atrocious shape. And that building that you see in the right picture, that building will be torn down and replaced with a new maintenance garage and operations facility. And what we're really trying to do here with this local improvement district, we're not building any bike lanes on Columbia Boulevard. We're not really building any bike facilities. We are building sidewalks in the area, but what we're really trying to do with this project is support bus service. So what you're looking at here is a map of the greater Portland region, not just Portland, but all of the suburbs around Portland. And you can see that there are 4 dots on the map. The 2 red dots that you see are in the city of Portland, and those are existing TriMet bus garages, which are completely full. They have no more room to buy any more buses, park them, and run service. You have 1 garage there shown in yellow, which is in Beaverton to the west of Portland, where they have some capacity left. But right now, what TriMet's doing is they're really increasing their bus service significantly. But what's happening is that they have to run all of their new additional bus service from that garage shown in yellow. So even if, for example, they're adding service way over on the east side of Portland, their buses spend a lot of time right now doing what they call deadheading, which is spending a lot of time driving from the bus garage to start their route. And so by adding that new bus garage shown in green, we'll cut down on what we call the deadhead time, and TriMet can spend their resources to be operating more in revenue service as opposed to just shuttling their buses around. So, and just to put this into perspective, the last time TriMet built a bus garage was in 1980, and the population of the greater Portland region has gone from about 1 million people to about 1.8 million people. The amount of service that TriMet has put out on the street has more than doubled. And so they've done a really good job of trying to squeeze all that into their existing bus and light rail facilities, but they're now at a point where they sort of hit the wall and they can't put more buses out on the street without a new bus garage. And then the next local improvement district that I wanted to cover with you is in our Gateway district. And we're really excited about this one. Gateway is an area that Portland has designated as a regional town center, which means that with all the people moving to Portland, we've been looking to concentrate growth in certain areas of the region. And this is where growth is targeted. So the map on the left is the local improvement district that council just formed last month. The map on the right is the next local improvement district that I'm expecting to form around the end of the summer. So this is what the regional center looks like today. You've got streets that are really in poor condition, have no stormwater management, there's no sidewalks. You can see the boarded up house there on the right. I mean, believe it or not, but this is an area that Portland has designated to be the most dense area of the city of Portland outside of downtown. Well, the only way that we're going to achieve that is by building the infrastructure to provide access. And just jumping back to this slide, one of the issues that we have here in Gateway is that we have what we call super blocks. So right now, for example, between Burnside Street, which is the same street, by the way, that I mentioned, another part of it was improved under a local improvement district many years ago. So you have Burnside Street here and you have Gleason Street up here. You have a freeway here. You really don't have any east-west streets between Burnside and Gleason. So it makes it really difficult to go anywhere in this neighborhood. You can drive through, there's very little on-street parking. So really Gateway is an area that you can drive through, but you can't stop and you can't park, and you don't have good access in the area. So we want to break up those super blocks. So just taking you to the next slide, the other thing we want to do is improve rail safety. Unfortunately, we've had a certain amount of accidents around the light rail line over the years. So TriMet's on a concerted effort to improve the safety of those rail crossings. So TriMet is financially participating in this new LID, and we're going to rebuild this rail crossing to make it safer for bikes to get and pedestrians to get through the intersection. So the next slide here, the picture in the top left is the Gateway Shopping Center that was built in 1954 when this was still a rural area. And you can see that from the other pictures that really not a lot has happened in 1965. I mentioned that this is designated as a regional center, but the irony of it is if you look at the Hazelwood neighborhood, which includes this area, the percentage of sidewalk coverage is lower in this area than it is the city as a whole. So we've designated this area to take all our growth, but we have less infrastructure today to serve this area than we do as the city as a whole. So that's why the LID is really important to building that infrastructure so that the development can happen. So we talk a lot about wanting to enhance the built environment, but one of the key objectives here was just simply that if we're going to have a lot of new housing units in Portland, it makes sense to put them where we have good transit service like light rail and bus service. This is the logical place to build new housing and for people to move to. You can move there without a car. You can move there, just ride your bike or use light rail, use bus. This is a great area to live and be able to get around with all the multimodal options. So I wanted to put this into perspective. This is a map of the state of Oregon. There's 36 counties in the state of Oregon, and I've been to all of them. They're all great to visit, but in the words of former Governor Tom McCall, visit, but please don't stay, because we have a lot of people moving here. But if you were just to take that map that I showed you of those 2 LIDs that we're planning for Gateway and look at the amount of population that will be housed with these new housing units, the population increase in this area, if we were to carve it out from Multnomah County and make it the 37th county in Oregon, the population increase of that LID area, if we were to call it Gateway County, would be larger than the population of 3 existing counties shown on the map, Sherman, Gilliam, and Wheeler County. And just put things into perspective, you may have heard of the scientist Linus Pauling. He actually moved out of Portland in the early 1900s out to Gilliam County, which is that county in the top right there, because he couldn't afford to live in Portland. So really, this is a land use. We're trying to support land use through this so that by building the infrastructure and building housing, you don't have to have people live far away with long commutes to work in Portland. And just to also kind of put this into perspective, this is a very auto-oriented development right now. So the area of the future LIDs is shown in green here. And the picture that you see to the right is that area that's shown in purple, which is closest to the major transit station that has 3 MAX lines coming into it. It's just not a very inviting environment. So took the train out here a couple months ago, got off. There's a barbed wire fence in front of me. There's an abandoned shopping cart. There's a surface parking lot with nobody parked there. Despite all this transit service, there's nothing happening there. And part of the reason nothing's happening there is because you don't have the population to support shops or restaurants. Now, contrast that with Orenco Station, which is on the same MAX line that is the one that I just showed you. The city of Hillsborough initially worked with developers to build that area shown up here in green. That was the area that was initially developed, not the area along the MAX stop. But what happened is when this area got built, you had the population base then to support future development. So then what happened is this area in purple got much more recently developed, and you can see how attractive it is with shops and restaurants. You can see picnic tables right up against the MAX line. It's a very warm and inviting place to go. So what we hope is that with 2,000 housing units coming into Gateway, that this will support redevelopment of this area and then make Gateway into something much more like Orenco Station, just an inviting area to go. And then this is, you saw the pictures of what the street looks like today. This is what we expect the LIDs to result in, is attractive new development and make this truly a regional center. And then we're also looking at using a park using an LID to build a park in that same area. So it's not just about building street infrastructure, we want to build park infrastructure as well. So that in a nutshell is my presentation. I have my contact information listed here. Would be happy to take questions from you, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so if you have a question, we'll just ask that you talk into the microphone, do your best to talk in a loud, clear voice, and our folks online will be able to hear your question as well. So if you are tuned in online, please do send in your questions through the GoToWebinar pane. And does anybody in the room have a question to start us off? Yes.
So my question is about the last LID that you showed, the Gateway Center. I'm curious if there's any consideration about any air quality concerns in that area, given the closeness.
I'm sorry, about what?
Air quality.
Air quality?
Given the closeness to the interstates.
The mic actually doesn't project the sound, but it'll capture it. The question is if there's concern about air quality in that area because of its proximity to the highway?
There is, and it's actually a really good question. We went to the design commission last night, and the first development is actually got design commission approval last night. I'm gonna just click back here. And the short answer is we don't, the location is where the location is. So we don't, this is actually a good example of what we're talking about. So we have new residential that's going to go in here. And you can see the sound wall back here. The sound wall isn't going to block all of the air pollution coming in. But one of the things that we are going to do is that I don't know the exact details of the design, but I know that the building designs for what's being proposed here takes that into account. They've got noise muffling built into the design of the building, and we're going to plant a lot of new street trees, and in addition to planting new street trees, there's going to be a lot of landscaping and vegetation. And so what we're really trying to do is sort of soften what is now a pretty harsh environment. It's obviously not going to eliminate all the freeway noise, and actually if you go, for example, to the Pearl District in Northwest Portland, you'll see high-rise condos right next to an interstate freeway. So can't make the freeway go away, but we can kind of soften up the effect of having it there.
Great.
Thank you.
Any follow-up to that? Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
So my question was about the school. I mean, that was really, I'm familiar with that street. I live out in that neighborhood. And I mean, it took 13 years to get that like LID done. Why did it take so long?
That is a very good question. Why does it take so long? I said when I interviewed for my job that I didn't want to retire until we got all the streets paved in the city of Portland. So I just want you to know, I'm probably going to live about 500 years. I hope you're okay with that. So one of the things that we put on the overview of this presentation was that the window of opportunities for local improvement districts is often short. So I guess what I really want to emphasize is LIDs as a general rule are not planned. It's sort of the antithesis of planning, which is with planning, you say, hey, we're going to prioritize this area and this is what we're going to do, etc. But LIDs are really property owner driven. It's really, for the most part, first come, first serve. So for those of you who are here in person, I have a map on the wall. And by the way, it's also available on my website. But it shows the 60-something odd LIDs that I've worked on in my career at the city. We have 14 currently formed LIDs. Those were all people calling me up and saying, I have a problem, can you help me solve it? So back to your question, people called me 13 years ago around 80th and Mill and said, we have a problem. But there are a couple of issues, and I won't stress them all, but I'll just hit on two main ones. Number one was the school district was going to be a participant in the local improvement district. So when I initially called the school district, they said, how many teachers do you want us to fire next year so that we can pay for your local improvement district? But then what happened was, and I don't I don't mean that flippantly, right? They have hard choices to make of, do I put another teacher in the classroom? Do I renovate a building, or do I pay for your local improvement district? I mean, you can pretty much figure the LID is going to be really low priority. What happened was, though, is in the course of budgeting for school modernization, they had certain requirements to do street improvements around their schools. So they had an identified source of funding when we formed the LID 2 years ago that they didn't have 13 years ago. So the conversation changed where it's no longer, what do I have to cut over here in order to pay for your LID? They already had an identified funding source. The second thing that really changed is you saw the map of the sanitary sewer improvement. Because the Bureau of Environmental Services already now, not 13 years ago, but 2 years ago, they had budgeted for a major sanitary sewer replacement. They had funds to do a certain amount of pavement restoration. So in a nutshell, 13 years ago, I had a difficult conversation asking the school district to pay when they didn't have the resources to do it. But even more importantly, I didn't have the STC funding lined up, and I didn't have the Bureau of Environmental Services funding lined up. So what it would have been is what we call an unsubsidized LID, where I would have had to go to mom and pop property owner and say, how do you feel about paying $125,000 per property to fix up your street? I mean, the need was undeniable, but people couldn't afford that price point. What happened was 11 years later, I went out and said, hey, BES is going to pay for the sanitary work. We have STC funding, and the school district can chip in their share. We got the price point far lower than what we talked about 13 years ago, and that's what made the LID go. Got a follow-up question?
Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah.
So like 40 to 50% of Portland, I'm a renter. So how do I, as a renter, like if there's something on the street or area where I live, but I'm not a property owner, how could I get like an LED going? Like what rights do I have as a renter?
Very good question. So the question was, if I'm a renter, then what rights do I have as a renter? So it's important to understand that the legal rights to support or oppose the local improvement district do not go with the renter, they go with the landlord. They go with the owner of the property. So really what it boils down to is, to be frank about it, is if we do an LID and assess an apartment unit, the cost of the LID will be passed on to the renters through the form of their rent. And so really what my job is, and I've done a lot of LIDs with multifamily residential. I showed you that Gateway LID. We built a brand new apartment building. I shouldn't say we did, the city didn't. We built a brand new street, and there was a brand new apartment building. So that was all factored into what the landlord called his pro formas. He said, I know I need to budget for the street improvements. It's going to be X dollars per unit per month for rent. And really, when you look at a street in really bad shape like that, I can give you examples of where we've done. I did an LID in Southwest Portland a number of years ago. When I first started looking at the LID, there were all these signs on the apartment buildings. There were only apartment buildings on the street, and it said for rent. When I got the street built, there were no more for rent signs. And I'm not saying that that would happen everywhere, but I don't know that the landlord actually had to increase the rent by simply getting the occupancy units up and reducing turnover, because every time somebody moves out of an apartment, there's a certain amount of time where they're not collecting rent. And so there is a real cost to the LIDs, but there's also a benefit to doing the LIDs. But the short answer is, if you live in an apartment on an unpaved street, you have to work through your landlord. So
we have a question from our online audience. Question from Jonathan R. Do you expect a lot of private right-of-way issues in order to add preferred curb, gutter, drainage, sidewalks when creating an LID?
I guess I'd want a clarification of what a private right-of-way issue is. The majority of LIDs that we build don't involve right-of-way acquisition. I will tell you, as an example, on that 80th and Mill LID, the one by the school, give you one example. There's one property owner who has their fence 30 feet out into the right-of-way. So we will be removing what we call an encroachment. We will be removing that encroachment from the right-of-way and taking the fence down, and won't be compensating the property owner for that. But the larger point that I would make is we typically have 50 or 60 feet of right-of-way. The important point I would make is we don't build up the entirety of the right-of-way just because we have the entirety of the right-of-way. Going back to what I said earlier about cost drivers, we, for example, will not build a 32-foot wide street just because we have the room horizontally to build 32 feet wide street. We really look at what the uses of the street are. So for example, on that 80th and Mill LID, we're building the street 32 feet wide because we have school buses going up and down the street and it's fairly busy. More typically on a residential street, we will build it 26 feet wide or sometimes even 20 feet wide. So one of the things we do is we go talk to the community and kind of figure out what their objectives are. So for example, if everybody has off-street parking and there's not a lot of traffic on the street and people don't need a wide street to just dash their cars, they're perfectly fine with the street functioning more for circulation, then we can, for example, build a 20-foot wide right-of-way and not build the entire extent of the right-of-way. So one of the things we do when we do form a local improvement district is we look to see what's there. Fences, trees. I forgot to mention that on that 80th and Mill LID, we have a very innovative design where we're actually going to build the street around some existing trees in the middle of the street so that we don't have to cut them down. So we look for features and topography. Could we avoid a retaining wall if we slid the street 2 feet off the center line? That is a big part of what we do in engagement on LIDs, is work with the property owners to identify what their issues, concerns are and make those variations. I think to wrap this up, the fundamental benefit of LIDs is rather than doing it property by property, we get to do a comprehensive neighborhood-wide improvement where we can take all those factors in, which we can't do if we just have one property owner coming in one-off developing a property. We can just take a far more comprehensive approach. But reducing impacts is a big part of what we do with LIDs.
Just as a quick follow-up to that, I know that the financial impact to an individual property owner is probably a big sticking point or negotiation point when proposing these. But as you mentioned, a lot of times if it is an unimproved street, folks don't know or don't necessarily see easily where their property ends and may end up putting things out there. So is that often a difficult negotiation point as well, where folks have basically, used the space that was available to them?
I would say it comes up. I would say the majority of the time we're able to successfully resolve those issues. But to your point, Timo, there are times, not often, but there are times where I go to people and say, here's the situation. For example, you may be in Southwest Portland. You may have really tight topography. I have to say to them, I say, look, if we pave the street and build it, it needs to be wide enough for a fire truck to get through, et cetera. So there are times when I go to neighborhoods and the discussion isn't financial of can we pay for this? It's like, we really don't want it to be wider than what it is. So sometimes the conversation is thanks, but no thanks. We don't want to widen it, do what we need to do here. But the other thing I want to stress, because you asked about the financial impact, we often have LIDs with no opposition from the community. And I think that might surprise you, but we are very deliberate about doing LIDs where people ask them to do them. We don't have a map of the city of Portland where we say, this street is next in line, we're going to go do an LID. We really do them in response to requests to do so. It is not unusual for us to go years between having anybody formally protest an LID, because we work really, really hard with the community to make sure that they support it and they like what we're putting together. And just to put things into perspective, I've been so busy with LIDs that last year we were forming a new LID on average about every 7 weeks. So we've just really been churning out the LIDs, but again, it's very common that we can go years between people actually objecting to an LID.
Thank you. Did I see a question? I see one back there. Here comes the microphone.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you about your own career trajectory. I don't believe that the city had an LID administrator 10 or 15 years ago, although people clearly saw the need, especially when the city annexed a lot of the county lands and the super blocks and the places that have very limited connectivity. So, and I wanted to cheat and add on a question. Have you ever done an LID that doesn't have, that's for pedestrians and bicycles only?
We did have an LID that we wrapped up about 2 years ago where we paved a bunch of streets, but there was one block that all we did was just put in a pedestrian connection. At some point, that pedestrian connection will probably be removed and put in with the street, but only when the property redevelops. And I think that's actually a really good example of what we try to be pragmatic. So in this particular instance, in theory, we could have formed the local improvement district and bought the buildings on either side of this one block that now only has a pedestrian connection. But that would have, back to my point about cost drivers that we identify in LIDs, if we know we have to take a building out, it's going to get really, really expensive. And so in that particular instance, for everywhere where the buildings weren't in the way, we said, fine, we'll go ahead and pave the street. Over here where the buildings are, we'll just put in a PED connection. That gateway LID that I showed you, it's going to have a lot of building demolition, because what we're doing is we're putting in new east-west streets where the street grid and the right-of-way does not exist. So those will be very expensive LIDs. I have a body shop that's going to be demolished, going to be moved out of the way because I got to put those new east-west streets. And one of you was asking me about why did it take 13 years to take care of that street by the school. I've been talking about Gateway for past 10 or 12 years, and it's been on the planning books for about 25 years. The reason nothing's happened is because they're difficult. Kind of my joke is that there are no easy LIDs left anymore because all the easy stuff got built years ago. What's left is the really hard stuff. And I just want to put a shout out to the engineers on my team because I give them really, really hard projects and they rise to the occasion every time. They're hard, but we get them done.
Great, thank you. We've got another question here.
So you describe subsidies at the LID level with other bureaus coming in to reduce the cost. Are there subsidies available for individual households that may be very low income, perhaps loan programs or other ways where that might be a very big hit for an individual household?
Good question. So Oregon law requires that LIDs be based on what is called special benefit to property. We can't base it on the income of the owner. So typically what happens with an LID is that they're assessed on a very consistent basis, like front footage or square footage. And what we don't do is say, well, because this person makes more money than the person next door, we're going to dig through their tax returns and say, well, you got to pay more because you have the ability to pay more. I think the most important thing to understand is that if people can't afford the LID, we will usually figure that out during the project development process. And like I said earlier, I've had conversations with people where it's very clear they needed an infrastructure improvement, but they couldn't afford it. So we didn't move ahead with the LID. That said, from time to time, we've been able to take advantage of opportunities to, for example, offer a deferral. So I showed you the project near the school there at 80th and Mill. We're actually going to offer a deferral program where we're going to overfund the LID and offer a deferral program, and then people can pay off their LID assessment when they sell their house, because we know the value of the property will go up. And we want to be sensitive to people that have cash flow issues. And this way, what will happen is when the LID gets closed out, a property owner can enter into an agreement with the city to defer their obligation until the sale of the house. There will be interest charged on that, but it's a modest expense. And then last but not least, I would say that one of the most successful LIDs that we did was quite some time ago when our urban renewal agency had more resources. We were able to go to Southeast Portland and say, we're going to give it to you for 99 cents per square foot of property. Doesn't matter what it costs, your obligation will be capped at 99 cents per square foot. And we'll also offer a deferral program as well. And that really made the conversation much easier, because instead of haggling with the property owner about, gee, could you drop the sidewalk or could you make the street 2 feet narrower to save us a few pennies? We're able to really frame the conversation of what works best for the neighborhood. We're not here to unnecessarily spend money, but we also don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. So for example, when we build a new street, it's what we call a 3-on-8 section. So 3 inches of blacktop on 8 inches of rock. What we don't want to do is to have the conversation, well, maybe we could build 2 inches of asphalt and 5 inches of rock. And then what happens is we have a maintenance problem in 30 years. We're still spending the money to build it correctly. We're just bringing the financial tools in place so that people aren't displaced. And that was really successful. We went out one year in the Lentz neighborhood in Southeast Portland. We paved a mile of streets in one summer, an entire mile. And we had tremendous economies of scale from it. And we were able to build that project cheaper on a per square foot basis than any other LID I've done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of streets that look like that, right where, you know, East Portland hits Multnomah County or hits Gresham. Have you ever executed an LID where the city of Portland improves one portion of a street and then another city or jurisdiction sort of continues that project into their own jurisdiction? And if you have, what that partnership looks like?
Very good question. The short answer is I haven't. I do recall a number of years ago, I had a street on the Beaverton border, and we talked about improving it, but just didn't really come to fruition, which is fine. I actually learned a lot from that, and I would say that I learned something from each and every one of these LIDs and LID conversations. I've been doing this for a long time, but I always learn something new on every project. So geographically, there's just not that many streets that are really on the borders with like Beaverton or Lake Oswego or Gresham or some of our surrounding cities. And remember, only 3% of the streets in the city of Portland are unpaved. And so if you threw a dartboard at the city of Portland, chances are your dart is not going to land on a street that's unpaved. But you point out something which is absolutely correct, which is occasionally we have jurisdictional issues. So if I were to have a street like that, the way it would work would be, so for example, if I'd done that LID with the city of Beaverton, then we would form a local improvement district for the properties on the Portland side, and then the city of Beaverton would form a companion LID for properties on their side. In that particular instance, we had agreed that the city of Beaverton would administer that LID if it were to have moved forward. So what would have happened is we would have had something called the intergovernmental agreement with Beaverton. We would have collected the money through the LID, given it to Beaverton, and then Beaverton would have built the street. So hope to do one of those projects in the future.
Thank you. I think we have time for about one more question.
I'm outside the city of Portland in Clackamas County, and follow on to the multi-jurisdictional question, follow on to your span time on projects. How do you document this and pass it on between, it's almost a generational thing for some of these LIDs. How do you summarize it and distill documentation so you can explain it to neighborhood people, to planners, to engineers, to elected officials, and where can one go to find summary sheets and then catalogs of these documents so you can understand the lingo between multi-disciplines? And it's imperative in my area because I'm multi-jurisdictional.
So a couple of things. When I took this job, we didn't even have a good inventory of where our problems were. So for example, I was just a citizen at the time working for Intel, and I asked the city of Portland, well, how many miles of unpaved streets do you have? What percentage of streets have sidewalks on them? They didn't really have answers for them. So one of the things that the city has done is really started to document the extent of the problem, which is that map that you see on the wall, which I've shown to many elected officials and stakeholders in the community. We now have it all broken down where we can tell you, here are all the unpaved streets, and we have it broken down neighborhood by neighborhood. And by the way, contrary to popular belief, most of our unpaved streets are not in East Portland. Most of our unpaved streets are in Southwest Portland. You have a much higher population in East Portland, so on a per capita basis, you can certainly argue that the need is there. So what we've tried to do is to make information-based decisions where we actually collect real data and share it. We have the website for the LID program. I spend a lot of time going to city council, and we have these policy discussions with elected officials. We had a very robust discussion back in March when we took the Gateway LID to council about how it fit into all these other priorities like building housing and encouraging transit-oriented development, et cetera. And then last but not least, every local improvement district, there's a lot of documentation that goes into council ordinances. So I neglected to share at the beginning of this presentation that there was a lot of question back in the day about whether we would ever do local improvement districts again, because the old LID process used to be kind of carved up among multiple city bureaus. And so if you talk to somebody at the city, you would kind of start here, and then you'd talk to somebody over here and talk to somebody over here. And then the product that got delivered out the back end was probably not what you sort of anticipated in the beginning, and invariably it'd be much more expensive than what you were promised in the beginning. So one of the changes that was made is that the city created an LID administrator position, which is my role, where property owners deal with the same person from start to finish. But the check and balance on it was, I wrote into city code a requirement that you have to document the scope of the project and the budget of the project when you form the LID, and then when you close out the LID, you have another estimate at the end. And that is a really good check and balance, because people are not signing up for a blank check. So what happens is when we form an LID, here's all the items of work, the quantities, total cost. When we get done at the end, this is what we actually built, and you can compare the two of them. So for that map on the wall has about 60 LIDs. For each one of those, you can pull up the council ordinances. You can see down to the penny, how much did we spend on concrete? How much did we spend on excavation? How much did we spend on design? Those are all documented. So now what we have is a very well-documented running history of each LID and how much they cost. So.
Great, thank you. Timo, it looks like one more question came in online. Do you want to ask that and close this out?
I'll see if I can. I'm not sure I'm getting at the gist of it. The question is the slide showing the Northeast 97th Avenue Phase 2 LID project? And I'm guessing they're looking at they were looking at the slide that was up there.
And what was the specific question, Timo?
That's the part I'm not sure of.
Okay.
But perhaps it's looking at what is the planned trajectory for that Phase 2.
What is the plan for it?
Yeah.
So what we're planning to do on Northeast 97th Avenue is we did an LID here up at the north end of the block a number of years ago. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the south part of this area, and we're going to fully complete the street connection so that the whole thing is built from Gleason down to Burnside. And then I showed you the slide of the rail crossing. This is where the Mac Flight rail comes around the corner here. This is where we're going to do a significant safety improvement so that people can cross those Mac tracks safely. We're also going to rebuild the traffic signal here as well. Right now, what you have is a tendency for people to want to drive south on 97th and then make a right turn kind of across the light rail tracks. So,
and that's just where the light rail.
So what happens is that if you're driving a car and you come up to the intersection there, you might be kind of tempted to make a right turn, not knowing, because remember, trains aren't loud, right? They run on electricity. They don't have a loud diesel motor. So they just sort of pop out quietly from behind here. And so we're going to reconfigure that intersection. We think we're going to make Northeast 97th Avenue one way away from the Max tracks, so that by building those new east-west streets, what we don't have to have is people exiting the neighborhood and crossing the Max tracks. They'll be able to exit the neighborhood by going out on new east-west streets to the north of here. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you everyone in person and online.
Thank you. My pleasure.
There's some donuts circulating around, so feel free to dig in and come up and take a look at the map up here, and any other questions you have, or just come to say hello.
Thank you for the great questions.
Tim Davis, yeah, good friend of so many people at PBOT.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know how it is that I've missed you all this time.
I've actually never been to a Trek seminar before.
Yeah.